Hello again, everyone. It's MrMostDaysOff.
And I'm the WizKid.
And we're here to talk about PopThreads.com, our newest sponsor and your online destination for all pop culture t-shirts. And right now, for our listeners, they are offering 10% off just by using the discount code Simpsons at checkout.
Woohoo!
They have some awesome Simpsons shirts. They've also got other things like old school Nickelodeon, my favorite, Legends of the Hidden Temple, and they've got us wrestling fans covered.
They also have up to the current season t-shirts from TV shows like Game of Thrones and The Walking Dead. So make sure you head over to popthreads.com right now.
Use that discount code Simpsons
so you can save a lot of dope!
Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to the Best Darn Diddly Review Show. My name is Miles, better known as MrMostDaysOff, and today we have a very special podcast. It is our Season 2 finale. We're going to be going over the final 2 episodes of Season 2, which are 3 Men and a Comic Book, as well as Blood Feud. And despite being called out for this last week, I'm going to go ahead and say it. We've got a couple of excellent episodes to talk about today. And let me go ahead and introduce you to the man who called me out. None other than your co-host with the most, Richie the WizKid. How are you today, Rich?
It is a great day today, so as you said, I am doing excellent. But I enjoy the first episode. The second episode, not so much as you do. Excellent, sir. But there is one of my favorite Simpsons lines in all of Simpsondom. But we will get to that. I will throw it back to you, the man, the myth, the Maya Quimby. It is Miles.
I was going to say, man, I know for a fact that one of your all-time favorite Simpsons quotes in history comes from the second episode today. So I don't understand how you can be dogging it that much. I thought they were both excellent, or great, whatever you called me out for saying last week. I don't even remember, but let's go ahead and get to the first episode, which is 3 Men and a Comic Book, which debuted on May 9th of 1991. The chalkboard gag was "I will not show off," which is funny just because that's essentially the essence of Bart's character in general. I mean, if Bart doesn't show off, he's really not doing Bart. Also, we get a couch gag, which is a repeat. One of my favorites, though, I mentioned before, this is something I used to do as a kid all the time. It's where the Simpsons all sit down at the same time, the couch rocks back, and Maggie pops up to be the only one able to view the show. There's a couple of notable appearances in this episode. First of all, we get probably one of the bigger fan favorite side characters, I would say, comic book guy. He's got a few catchphrases, like worst side character ever, or, whatever. We also get the first mention of Fallout Boy, the sidekick to Radioactive Man.
It has a good little moment in this one, too, that my companion guide pointed out that I didn't even catch until I read it, but we will get into that as well.
Right on. So, this episode gets started with Bart and Lisa in the back seat of the car. Marge is driving, and they are very excited to get to the comic book convention because they want to get there early before all the good comics are gone. Bart points out that Lisa has nothing to worry about because she's only after copies of Casper the Wimpy Ghost, and nobody wants those. There's a great little line here where Lisa basically calls out Bart for more or less the fact that he associates being friendly with being wimpy. And I think she says, I hope that keeps you from ever truly being popular, which is actually really kind of a harsh blow in a lot of ways.
But then Bart has an equally good conversation topic that I've always had on my mind since I first saw this episode, where he points out that Casper is just the ghost of Richie Rich.
How did Richie Rich die?
I love this little moment, though, because when he holds up the comic books, you're like, oh my god, Casper is the ghost of Richie Rich. What the hell?
Yeah, they do look really similar. That's totally true. That's totally true. I also really like here in the same conversation, Bart is essentially trying to prove why Radioactive Man is the best comic book. And he says, Radioactive Man never punches anyone without saying something witty first. And then he shows the example where Radioactive Man punches somebody into the sun and then is like,
hot enough for you? Which
exactly.
is almost the exact antithesis of McBain, who always has the corniest one-liners to say. But I love this. I love the hot enough for you. And anytime I think of Radioactive Man and one-liners, I always think of the episode where Rainier Wolfcastle is actually playing Radioactive Man in the movie, and he can't get the up and atom joke right.
Up and atom.
Up and atom. Up and atom. Up and atom. Atom. Like, I love that. It gets me every time. But I think that's
a really fun episode.
Yeah.
The goggles do nothing.
The goggles, they do nothing.
I also really enjoyed here when Lisa, essentially, she also agreed that was a good point. And I think she said, I can't remember exactly what she said, but basically it was along the lines of, like, good point.
It shows you how powerful Radioactive Man, how powerful Radioactive Man is. He even won over Lisa. Is this also the first appearance of Bartman? I
know that we've referenced Bartman before. I was trying to remember if we actually have seen him in the cape. I feel like we have, but I cannot pinpoint which episode it was.
My issue is that I know in Bart the Daredevil he's wearing a cape, but it's not the Bartman costume.
I feel like he's wearing it one of the times that he does an El Barto spray paint. That stands out to me for some reason.
I think you made that up.
Yeah, I do that. I do make things up. Regardless, they're in line for the Comic-Con, essentially, and they see a sign that it's $8 for regular admission, $5 if you're dressed as a popular comic book character, or cartoon character, I think it actually said. But yeah, so Bart says, this seems like the type of discount for Bartman, and he changes in a telephone booth that's actually currently being used at the time. I also really dug that every time you saw Bartman here in the first couple of scenes, they had kind of a whooshing cape sound effect that came along with it, and it was really dope.
I was going to comment on that, like when he goes in to talk to Otto, and he comes into frame going whoosh.
Don't you mean Busman?
No, he only had a drawing. Bart was actually dressed as Bartman.
True. You brought it up earlier in your opening when you referenced me as the Mayor Quimby of the show, apparently. Mayor Quimby is giving a speech here thanking the patrons for bringing in almost $300 worth of business, which made me laugh because nowadays going to Comic-Con, that's like $300 per person, at least on average.
Yeah.
It's so expensive. I would really love to go, especially the one in San Diego, but it's just so expensive just to get in the door. And then most of the cool shit costs more money. Like, that's the real fucked up part, is like a lot of the people signing autographs and things of that nature, it's not included with the admission. You have to pay like an additional fee. And like I know a lot of people that go to Comic-Con and spend a lot of money when they go.
I definitely think it'd be fun to go to San Diego's Comic-Con at least once. I know they have a pretty big one here in Dallas pretty frequently that would also be fun to go to, but
we should definitely check that out. Yeah.
I think it'd be awesome. Do a podcast there.
That's a really cool idea, actually. We should look into that. I've done a couple of the WWE fan accesses, which is essentially their version. It's like the WWE version of Comic-Con. And the thing is, I had one really awesome experience when I went to WrestleMania 30 in New Orleans. And then I had a really crappy experience this past year in Dallas, where luckily I didn't have to travel far for that one. But it was just like basically everything that you would be worried about happening while you were at one of those conventions happened. Like, the lines for everything were just way too long. Everything was extra. It was just a nightmare. Like, all the things that made it great the first time I went, where there was a lot of free entertainment and like swag that they're giving out and things of that nature, was like the opposite. Everything was real tightened up, and most people ended up spending time waiting in line to get like certain superstars' autograph or divas' autograph. They used to be divas at that time. And what would end up happening is you'd be waiting in line so long that they'd actually have a shift change, and they'd bring out a different super. So you might have like been trying to get like a Sasha Banks autograph, and then like right before they bring out like some NXT girl you've never heard of, or right after, I should say. But you know, it was still cool. I had fun, but it was just it was nowhere near as fun, and I did not feel it was worth the money the second time around. But
that's really fucked up that like they change up the person you're in line for, like, and then you're like, well, I'm already in line, so I guess I'm screwed.
It basically happened to all of our friends that went with me. Like, Corey had it happen to him. Emily was excited to meet one wrestler, Dolph Ziggler, and it changed right before she got to him. So like, super fucked up. Justin, who you know, shout out to our boy Justin, wanted to meet Sheamus. He changed, like, all of that. But that's enough wrestling talk. This is a Simpsons podcast. If you want to hear me talk about wrestling, go over to voicesofwrestling.com and check out Lucha of the Hidden Temple.
I know, I almost fell asleep during your story.
All right, Grandpa. So let's get back to this episode.
Rad Russian for life.
So we're at the Comic-Con, and Bart and pretty much everyone, Milhouse, they're all excited to meet Buddy Hodges, the guy who played Fall Out Boy on TV. And he's doing a Q&A. Which, this is actually kind of another thing that's I imagine would really suck if you ever go. I hear everyone that goes to these things, it's always amazing. It's always a really cool time. I watch a lot of the YouTube videos. I'm sure it's fun. But, like, can you imagine wanting to, like, meet one person and then getting there and all they wanted to do is pitch that they were in the current production of Cats?
Well, I would imagine that this kind of character doesn't have a lot of work outside of being Fall Out Boy 25 years prior to that, or however long it was. So he's got to promote himself. You promote ours left and right, so it's kind of one of those things.
Oh, shameless self-promotion.
But anyways, nowadays you can do one thing and be known for it forever and get rich off of it forever. So I think it's a little bit different.
I'm with you. I thought it was kind of funny.
It was funny. I laughed a lot about that.
I also really enjoyed the Laramie cigarette commercial that he was featured in, that, you know, he's all disappointed because he's not 16 yet, so he can't smoke Laramies like Radioactive Man can, I think it was.
Yes, and think about that, like the smoking on TV ads, which, you know, back then it was common, and they definitely touch on that in this little ad. The Simpsons, A Complete Guide to Our Favorite Family, the companion guide that I use, actually points out the irony in the fact that his character can't smoke and can't wait until he can smoke, and the actor himself has a cigarette in his hand in the scene.
I didn't even catch that, but that's fucked up and really funny. That's awesome. So I want to tangent here for just a second, because I kind of came across a cool story while I was doing some research on this episode. And first of all, let me say, there was not a lot of information for this episode. Usually I have several pages worth of notes that I find, like from just various bits of trivia and things that I find relevant to the episode. This time I found like 4 things, and one of them was that comic book guy's first appearance was this episode, and the voice was slightly off, which we'll talk about a little bit. But other than that, one thing I do want to talk about that's going to maybe make some of you happy and possibly turn a few of you off, but please don't turn off the podcast. This will be brief. The band Fall Out Boy, who I'm a fan of, I like their music, but there's kind of a fun, I want to say it's urban legendish, because it's very hard to find anything that actually confirms this, but there's a lot of stories on the internet that Fall Out Boy, back in 2001, when they were just getting started in the suburbs of Chicago, were playing their second live show. They had played their first live show without a name, and they had a list of names that they were still deciding on their second live show, and they decided that they were going to poll the audience to see what they should call themselves.
Clever idea.
And what ended up happening is they give their list of ideas of all of their band names, and rumor has it that somebody in the crowd essentially yelled out, "Fuck those, you should call yourself Fall Out Boy." And the rest is history.
I'm surprised there's not any kind of like copyright issues with that either.
I don't know if what the lawsuit situation would be on something like that. I mean, I think that, I guess theoretically, if the Simpsons had registered that name or something, but I really don't know. I think it would be if they like use their likeness on their album cover, that would be an issue. But just having the name, I don't think can be copyrighted. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer.
Okay, Lionel Hutz. I'm not some fancy lawyer, but...
Exactly. I can frame something like he did that makes it seem like I did. I also thought there was a kind of an interesting... It was a joke, but it kind of hits a little close to home based on some of our people that we know of recently, Bill Cosby, that may have fallen from grace in their later years. They talk about Dirk Richter, who played Radioactive Man, and they, of course, wanted to remember him for that, and not for the sort of details of his final years.
Which Bart actually alludes to in his question to Mr. Fallout Boy about him being gunned down somewhere by the police or something, didn't he say?
No, actually, he was found in a bordello,
that's right,
where with his bullet-riddled body, basically. There was a bunch of B words going there. He was found in a bordello with his bullet-riddled body.
By Bartman.
But yeah, this made Buddy Hodges break down in tears, remembering his lost friend, Dirk Richter.
Which I have to say, Bart and Milhouse got front row seats to this little meeting here, this greet and meet here. And they must have been in line for a long time for that. Like, how did they pull that off? Because it seemed like everyone wanted to see Fall Out Boy. But I was proud of them for getting front row seats.
Keep in mind, there is only $300 worth of business at this thing, $5 to $8 a head, I should say. So, I mean, realistically, this is not the most crowded of Comic Cons. But I do see your point. They were front and center for this
and all
event.
their classmates were there, so there was a decent amount of kids there.
There was competition,
yeah.
Sure. Right after this is when we meet, for the very first time, Comic Book Guy. Now, I mentioned it earlier, he does sound a little bit off in this one, and that's been a kind of a common running theme across The Simpsons in general. Before these characters really find themselves and get more established, there's always been a little bit. Sometimes we've even talked about times when, like, for instance, the Bullies, back all the way in season 1, Kearney and Jimbo, the voice actors for those two, were actually flip-flopped in the first episode they appear in, and then they decided to switch roles after that. Things of that nature happen. This, I'm mostly sure it's the same guy. I did not actually check, but it sounds like the same guy to me, just kind of doing a little bit different inflection.
Yeah. I think it's Hank Azaria that does his voice.
I believe it is Hank Azaria.
I kind of heard him in that too. Like, you can hear the Comic Book Guy a little bit for how he sounds today, but he's got to fine tune it and get some repetition going before he finds his voice, basically. Especially with all the different characters Hank Azaria does. How do you make all these people sound different?
And also keeping in mind, this is 1991. Hank Azaria is still really young. He has a lot more time to develop his craft. I mean, he's already an insanely talented person. But I think just over the years, I mean, if you're doing these voices for 20 years, you're going to be able to fine tune and pick things up that you may not have had from the beginning.
Exactly. And what gets me in this exchange he has with Bart is he gets Bart to bow down to the power of God in this little moment here. Like, it's impactful if Bart starts getting into religion all of a sudden and not on the devil's side.
I never knew why God put me on this planet until now. It's to buy this comic book. So, Bart now is focused on this comic. That's all he's thinking about. They're on the car ride home from Comic-Con. I love, Lisa got like 30-something issues of Lois Lane, and what was the other comic, do you remember?
I fell asleep when she was talking.
Well, she basically got what you might call girl comics. She got like a stack of like 40 of them, essentially, for a buck. Whereas Bart was looking at the one issue of Radioactive Man that he wanted for $100. Homer starts talking after Lisa mentions Lois Lane about how he never really saw the appeal in her, but Wonder Woman, man, that does something for him. He goes on a little bit of a perv raid here.
Which I would too. I mean, most of the women that have played Wonder Woman over the years too look spot on, especially Ms. Gal Gadot. Ooh, yeah, give me Wonder Woman with that lasso any day.
Well, and I mean, I don't think that I can speak for everyone. I can speak for a large percentage of males in my demographic that any chick that you add, like, the superhero get-up, like, that kind of, like, nerdy, hot edge to it, like, the prime example, of course, is Olivia Munn. Like, she would always do the cosplay stuff, but, like, I think when you add the element of cosplay to almost any female, for me, as a heterosexual 32-year-old male, am I 31 or 32?
Buddy. Don't make us older than we are. We're 31. We're 31.
I totally just blanked on that. Wow, okay, I'm 31. That's fine. I'm I forgot. It happens at this age. It doesn't really matter. I'm going senile. But as a 31-year-old heterosexual male, I think I can speak for a lot of my age range heterosexual males that the cosplay thing,
it works.
It does something for me, man.
I was at a Halloween party this year, and this lady was dressed up as Wonder Woman, and it pushes certain things up.
Like your dick?
Exactly. Lasso that, Wonder Woman. But anyways, it was really dark there, but from a distance, I kept asking my buddies, I was like, who is that? I've never seen her before, and we're all in the same circle of friends, and when they told me, she was apparently like this 45-year-old woman, but she looked like she was freaking 25 with that costume on, and I was just like, oh. And they were like, and she's a lesbian, and I was like, well, don't tell me that part, that just makes it harder.
That's never stopped you before.
Exactly.
That's for a whole other podcast. They're on the car ride, and Homer suggests a nice dinner at Krusty Burger, and Bart starts with the buttering up. He gets very complimentary, like, oh, what a great suggestion. I can't believe how intelligent of a suggestion that was, blah, blah, blah. And Homer immediately is like, what do you want, boy? And I love this part. Basically, Bart tells him he wants a $100 comic book, and Homer is like, $100? Who is it drawn by?
Michelangelo?
He completely butchered Michelangelo. It's one of my. I love Homerisms like that. That cracks me up. Like saxophone.
Saxophone.
But then we get a
saxophone.
Then we get a phenomenal scene at the Krusty Burger. It's one that parodies a scene that they've already made a Simpsons trope, but will go on for years being amazing and funny. Bart is doing the classic, please can I have $100, please can I have, just trying to break Homer down. And Homer finally actually has a moment where he's like, look son, I know that usually if you keep asking me for things, I've broken down in the past. And I appreciate you trying, it shows that you've been paying attention. But we both know I am not giving you $100 for a comic book. So, will you quit bothering me? Will you quit bothering me? Will you quit bothering me? And he basically reverses it on Bart until Bart finally gives in and says, fine, I'll quit bothering you. To which Homer gloats like he's 10.
I wrote a note down. Homer wins a round of Are We There Yet?
Yeah, exactly. I really love that he really starts rubbing it in Bart's face to the point that Marge even kind of calls him out. It's like, Homer, stop gloating.
Which it's Homer. He's going to.
There was a question I had about this scene, though, and I wanted to see if you noticed it. I couldn't really tell, but Maggie was doing something on the table during this scene. Did you catch that?
I did not catch it, actually. I was writing down notes about Homer winning Are We There Yet? And I knew the Wonder Years thing was coming up, so I was busy jotting stuff down for that. What was she doing? Was she doing something Muggle or Jedi-like?
No, that's the thing, is I was hoping that you guys, I think they were just trying to show that, like, babies essentially always do stuff, but I think she was, like, grounding salt packets into the table, but I know a lot of times that, like, you know, at least depicted in movies and books, witches will often use, like, salts to, like, salt the earth to summon certain powers or spirits or things, so I just saw Maggie doing things with salt, and it made me suspicious based on what we know about her.
Maybe she was putting evil forces at bay, or she needed a stroke of good luck and she's about to throw salt over her left shoulder.
That's possible. I love that scene in Dumb and Dumber when they do that and he ends up hitting the fucking guy. that kills me every time. Oh, man. So regardless of what Maggie was doing, during this scene at Krusty Burger, Marge recalled a time when she really wanted something that she had to work hard for. And basically she agreed to be Patty and Selma's slave so that she could earn enough money to buy herself an easy bake oven. I really like the fact that when Marge agreed to be Patty and Selma's slave, their first thought was like, wow, we're going to have a lot more free time on our hands. We should take up smoking.
What I like is that they sound like girls before they start smoking, but by the end of this little montage, they sound like Patty and Selma.
Yeah, they've got the raspiness going on, totally. Yeah. I also like that during the whole time Marge is talking about how, like, all she would do is work, the Patty and Selma would both just smoke, and it showed them sitting on their beds, lounging, smoking cigarettes while Marge was, like, scrubbing and doing all of their chores. By the end of this montage, if you will, the women were absolutely, their voices were just totally ruined, which, you know, is kind of true and kind of funny. I don't think it happens that fast, but it is it is a true side effect. I mean, it is what it is. I'm not saying don't smoke if you want to, but I am saying, you know, just be cognitive of the fact that it's not good for you.
You heard it here first, folks.
Yeah, I'm sure this is the first time you've ever heard. We then get to Marge coming up with the idea of maybe a part-time job is the answer, because she basically, the moral of her whole flashback was once she earned that easy bake oven, she even said that things tasted better because she had worked hard for it.
Which I didn't see her eating any of it. It was her sisters eating it.
Yeah, that's true. But Bart says kindly that, Mom, I couldn't ask you to do that. You're already doing so much with raising the kids and keeping up with the house.
And he says it so nonchalantly, too.
Yeah, like it didn't even cross his mind.
Yeah.
I also enjoyed the fact that it was actually Lisa who corrects him, too. She's like, she's talking about you getting a job, you idiot. Then we get an awesome little throwaway or homage to the Wonder Years, where we get Daniel Stern, who...
one of the sticky/wet bandits.
Exactly, one of the wet bandits or sticky bandits, depending on which Home Alone movie you're watching. And there's only 2. I don't care what IMDb says. But yeah, so he's doing the voiceover in a total Wonder Years style, you know.
Me? A job? Were they serious? I didn't realize it at the time, but a little piece of my childhood had slipped away forever.
Yeah, exactly. I love it. I've said before, I know we talked about the Wonder Years a little bit with Matthew Klickstein, all the way back on the very first episode of season 2 when we had him as a guest on our podcast. And here we are on the last episode of season 2 talking about the Wonder Years again. I just thought that was really cool. As I mentioned, I'm a big fan of that show. So this little reference I thought was great.
And Daniel Stern, like, even though it's just a few little lines here, it's just perfect. It's so spot on. I'm glad they got him to actually do it, too.
Yeah, that helped a lot. I completely concur.
So then Bart gets a full-time job that he stays at forever, working at the nuclear power plant with Homer.
Don't be an idiot, Richie. He wasn't looking for a full-time job. He was looking for a part-time job.
Oh, okay.
So it actually does show here, Bart is actively seeking. He really wants this comic book bad. He's got $30. That's not enough. He's wanting to get the comic book. It's gonna have to work for it, he determines. I like there's a scene where he's kind of doing a couple of odd job things, just trying to scrounge for money. He takes a glass bottle to Apu, and Apu basically is like, want to trade that for a squishy like normal? And he's like, nope, I need the dime today, Apu. And Apu is like, oh, I'm glad you found a trade.
I like that he didn't say he was going to trade it for an actual squishy. He said he was going to just give him credit off the credit off the price of his squishy.
That's what it was. Yeah, discount. Put that dime to good use. He also takes the antique coins from the wall, 4 antique foreign coins from the display case on the wall. He takes it to the foreign currency exchange and gets a whole 3 cents for it.
Just for those that are interested, they're coins from Bolivia, according to my guide.
Bolivian coins were 3 whole cents.
Sounds about right.
The sad thing is, I know a lot of people put money into like those collector's coins, and more often than not, that's pretty much what happens. These weren't exactly these weren't like the type of thing where you get like a quarter printed with like R2-D2 on it or something. Which, by all means, I've got a lot of worthless shit in my man cave that I'm looking at right now. I've got action figures and toys and shit that just will never ever be. That's money spent. It's money gone. I dig that. We all spend money on stupid shit.
Didn't Homer and Bart have a coin collection in the past, or is that in the future, where they collect a whole bunch of coins?
I think that's down the road. We haven't gotten to that one yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was like, they should have had a lot more to trade in.
But yeah, a lot of times our shit that we collect is absolutely worthless in a pinch, and that's the harsh truth of reality.
I just remembered, it's the Kissing Lincoln. They're going after the Kissing Lincoln coin.
Yeah, totally.
It's rare.
So I really like this next little tidbit where Bart actually opens a lemonade stand, and it sucks. It's not doing any business. People are just looking at him pathetically and laughing.
He said somebody pulled over to actually laugh at me, and that's it.
Lisa actually tries to help by making him look a little more pathetic. She messes up some of the letters on his sign and twists his hat around a little bit, and all that does is get Nelson to come by and do a classic ha-ha, which I thought was great.
Yeah, it was just the slow bike ride by. Ha-ha!
I'll do a shout-out real quick. IPA Quest on Twitter is a cool dude. He reviews beers, and he actually just sent me, not too long ago, El Segundo Brewery from California has just released an IPA. It's called Ha Ha IPA, and it is labeled with Nelson on the outside label. Essentially, it's themed on the Simpsons.
That is so cool.
And I'm sure it's overpriced, and I'm sure it's just like a pretty average IPA. But by golly, as soon as that's available, I'm gonna try the hell out of that.
If it's called Ha Ha, that's a double word, so it should be at least a double IPA.
Unfortunately, it is not a double IPA. I'm looking at the bottle right now. It is, in fact, just it's called Ha Ha IPA.
Oh.
I will say, though, it is 7.5% alcohol by volume, which isn't crazy high, but
that's
a
pretty
couple
good.
of those will get you toasty. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. It's got, for what it's worth, it's got a 4-star rating on Untappd, so it sounds like a pretty decent beer. I want to check it out. Hey, El Segundo, sponsor us.
We'll get drunk on the air, possibly, if we haven't already.
Sure, totally. Yeah, we'll have a drunk episode with the Rassle Nerds who are going to be joining us in Season 3. Shout out to the Rassle Nerds.
We should wait until it's the episode where Bart and Lisa go with Patty and Selma to Duff Beer Gardens or wherever that is. That'd be a great one to have them on.
Fun stuff. So, Lemonade's not going anywhere for Bart. But he gets a new idea. He decides he needs a product, or Lisa actually helps him come up with the idea that he needs a hotter product, something that's going to fly off the shelves. So he goes and he raids the fridge, and sure enough, he finds Homer's Duff. He starts selling it for a nickel. He took the lemonade for a dime. He lowered the price on the beer to a nickel, and boy, oh boy, did it draw a crowd. I love that we get Barney coming up to the bar and asking if he can get one on credit because he's a little bit short right now on a fucking nickel.
Which Bart was finding almost that much in his couch.
Bart turned that bum away, too. That's the funny part.
It's like he already knew how to do it. I can see Bart doing stuff like this in the future, and which we talked about this in the past with Matthew Klickstein, where Bart has the street smarts. Like, he knows how to get by in life just fine, even better than just fine. We talked about this in length with him. Like, he's doing this like a pro.
Yeah, Bart's going places in life. I know there's a lot of talk when you get into Simpsons lore that the idea, it seems, is that Bart at some point becomes a Supreme Court justice.
Yep.
And they've made several references to that. Apparently, I read that they've backed off from that in recent episodes. I don't know exactly why. As I've said before, I've not seen a lot of the recent stuff. I'm much more well-versed in the older Simpsons than I am the newer Simpsons. But Bart has a head on his shoulders. There's no doubt. He's not going to run away and set the bell curve by any stretch of the imagination. But when it comes to getting shit done, he's a go-getter.
Think about this. This is basic supply and demand. You offer something at a low price at the immediate release, and then when everyone likes it, you jack up the prices.
Yeah, unfortunately, he didn't quite get that far, but before Homer busts him, we actually see a scene where the cops come and ask him for his liquor license. I love his response. He's like, oh, the liquor license? My dog ate it. Which is such a great Bart Simpson answer.
But then he does the thing where he pays them off with beer, basically.
He totally schmoozes. Yeah, he's like, but hey, you guys have been working hard. I bet you're thirsty. How about one on the house? And they're able to overlook this minor infraction of a 10-year-old boy selling beer curbside for a nickel.
Smart guy, that Bart.
Oh, he is. Homer comes home, sees his Duff empty, and has a meltdown in the middle of the yard.
But where does he work out again?
Exactly. Nuclear.
Ugh, you're killing me, Smalls.
So next we see a scene at Jake's unisex hair palace where Marge is getting her hair did and talking to an old lady about how her son is trying to save up for a comic book. She's like, oh wow, boys never change, and if you would like, you can send him over my way, and I've got a few chores he can work and earn a little bit of extra money on the side. Bart, desperate for this comic book, again, he's willing to work, guys. Like that, if you're Bart Simpson, and that says something about you as a person. We're gonna get to that a little bit here shortly, but Bart is willing to work for this comic book, and work he does. She, this old lady that he goes to it's very funny. She's everything is exactly like it is. Like, this sounds fucked up, and I'm sorry, old people who listen to the show. If you're old and active, good for you. But even old people that, like, are active know the old person that I'm talking about right now. Like, the person that is basically on death's bed, waiting to die, not really living in current times, just kind of, like, almost if isolated in a time bubble that is their house. Bart's dealing with that. She's moving slow. She's showing pictures. She's
getting old candy that's all glued together because it's been in the bowl for so long.
But all boys love candy, Richie.
Not diabetic boys.
Yeah, diabetic lives matter, and this bitch does not seem to care. I actually really like, too, there's a scene here where Bart's asking about a guy's picture, and she's like, oh, that's my brother. He died in the Great War from holding a grenade too long. And it shows a flashback of the guy, or I think this is actually just in Bart's head, but who knows. But Bart, this brother is holding the grenade, and basically he just keeps going on about who this grenade is in revenge for. He goes on a little bit too long, explaining that, yeah, even this guy, he's actually a really good guy, and the grenade explodes.
It kind of felt like they did this a thing like this a couple times in this episode. They'll do it with Radioactive Man later, where it seems like a little action scene sort of thing, where it's like over dramatically heroic, so to speak, and then something terrible happens.
Yeah, totally. So we get to the part where Bart's actually going to do the work. And the lady, I can't remember her name. I'm not gonna lie. She had one.
I think it's Mrs. Glick or something like that.
Let's go with Glick. Glick is as good as old lady, so we'll call her Mrs. Glick. And if we're wrong, we're sorry. It's really not that important. Mrs. Glick, though, is giving Bart some instructions for the yard work. She's like, I need you to get rid of all the weeds. She shows her the yard, and she's like, do you know which ones the weeds are? And Bart's like, all of them? That's right. And she's going to go and watch her stories. So, a couple of things I want to talk about here. First of all, I have to comment. I'm sure you caught it, Rich. I know you had to have caught it. Because her stories start with a man seducing a woman. And she's declaring, no, you know I'm married. And he doesn't stop. He says, that's what turns me on. So once again, Rich, Simpsons did it before Richie the WizKid did.
They planted the bug in my brain.
Is that why you are only attracted to married women? You fucking asshole.
Maybe so. No, I've never done the fucking asshole part. To a married woman, at least. But let's... Simpsons planted it in my brain, the damn bastards.
I don't think that's going to hold up in court, especially if you hire someone like Lionel Hutz.
I saw a recent Geico commercial that will beg to differ.
Fair enough. So, Bart works his ass off, and he's getting cut up, and he goes a whole day, and he comes home. Marge is like, hey, did you get any money? No, but I am in a lot of pain.
Which, I want to comment, when she opened up the cabinet in her bathroom looking for the iodine...
To help his wounds from all the hard work he's done.
There was a small package with a bunch of little circles in it. I think those were condoms.
Was it really? I didn't catch that at all.
I think they were condoms.
Were they all dried out and expired?
They were just little shriveled circles inside bags. And I was like, oh my god, Mrs. Glick has condoms. Good for her.
This is something a lot of younger people don't like to think about, but the simple fact of the matter is, I hope it's true, because I know eventually one day I'll be old too. Old people get down, man.
Get down.
They really do. I've had friends, and even my wife for a while has worked at a retirement home or an assisted living center.
They're going to say even my wife for a while has been old.
Yeah. Well, you tried to point out that we were swingers last week. How do you think we met? But no.
That was the Flanders's.
But yeah, so I have several people in my life I know that have worked at assisted living centers or retirement, living centers, places where old people live, goddammit. You know what I'm trying to say. And they fuck a lot. A big issue, honestly, in many retirement centers is STDs. Because old people are like, fuck it, we're gonna die soon anyway, who the fuck cares? So they just get down and dirty, and they've got 80, 90 years worth of chlamydia and syphilis and all of the STDs they have. Yeah, so they're just tossing around all of their stuff, and that's actually a real common thing, is old people tend not to use condoms, and...
There's a whole Parks and Rec episode about it.
There is a whole... But there's actually some truth to it, too. It's kind of awesome. Anyway, that's enough about old people fucking. Unless you want to keep talking about it.
Hey, your grandma and grandfather had sex. Fact.
True story. Every single person listening to this podcast right now, your grandparents had sex at least once. Math. So anyway, Bart goes back for more. He's worked his ass off. He hasn't actually seen a paycheck yet, but he's hoping for the light at the end of the tunnel. Oh, I also like when she goes at him with the iodine. Every time he works, he ends up all cut up from the thorns and such, and she comes at him with the iodine, which of course burns like crazy. And towards the end, he's like, not the iodine! Burn it off! Burn off the cuts! Amputate it! Just not the iodine!
It's actually a movie moment. The Mrs. Glick shadow looming over Bart's quivering shadow, and Bart actually pleads, No, not the iodine. Burn the germs off with the torch. Amputate my arm, but not the... Yeah! And that's actually a scene from Gone with the Wind.
They do Gone with the Wind a lot, man.
In the earlier years,
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. They do. They've gone to that several times. So... Payday has arrived, Richie.
Cha-ching.
Cha-ching, right? He's gonna have enough. He's gonna be able to go stop at the script club, make it rain on a few hoes.
They're not gonna want him to make it rain the way he gets paid.
He ends up with 2 quarters, dude. That sucks. bad. That's really awful.
Yeah, he gets the shaft
I
for
feel
sure.
really bad for him in this one.
He absolutely
and this
gets the
goes back
shaft.
to her being stuck in the past, not having any concept of how far 2 quarters goes. Which I'm gonna jump ahead. There's a line here in a little while that I love when Bart actually gets home and tells Homer how much he made, and Homer's like, "Well, when I was your age, 50 cents went a real long way, or it was a lot of money back then." And Bart's like, "Really?" And Homer's like, "Nah." This made me laugh, but also it made me really sad because I had a similar experience, but I feel like such a dick because mine's so much better than Bart. Like, or maybe I just feel worse for Bart because his is so much worse than mine was. But I actually have a really similar experience to this. It wasn't with an old person though. So out where my parents live, like when they first moved in, you would just buy a lot of land, and they were 1 acre lots, and you could buy whatever, and you know, there's rules. And I don't know. There's 1 acre lots for sale essentially, and in between my next door neighbors and I, there was an empty lot that was purchased but never had a home built on it. And long story short, we'd been there for a few years, and I was like a young teen, too young to drive to actually have like a real job, but like young enough or old enough to like want to work and have money so I could buy things like comic books for a stupid amount of money or whatever it was I was buying at the time. But my neighbor basically wanted to sell that lot of land, and he had just let it go wild for the entire time. So it was like thick of grass and weeds and trees and all sorts of shit. And I agreed to this job. In my youth ignorance, I agreed to completing this job where I would clear this 1 acre of land for $100. And that doesn't sound like too bad of a deal. But by the time I actually got through, because it was so fucking thick, dude, like everything was so thick, it took forever. And there was briar, like angry fucking Texas roid briar, where it like attacked you, like jumping briar. I swear it's a thing. And I actually ended up having to replace 2 lawnmower blades and get it sharp and get the final one that I bought, the third one that was on there, sharpened after I was done, which essentially by the time I got done with this project, I don't even think I made $20, and it took me like 2 fucking weeks to complete it because I was going to school and shit, so like I was working on it like an hour after school every day or however it was until it got dark or until I fucking ruined a lawnmower blade because there's so many like thick stumps and things hiding out there. So in a lot of ways, I totally know how Bart feels. He got it shafted even harder than I did. However, I will say there was like a 10-year difference in between me and him because, well, not quite actually. This happened in 91, and that was probably happening to me in like 97, 98. So there was like 5 years of there's like 5 years of inflation here that, credits me a little bit, but still, it fucking sucked.
But you lost money though.
In the end, like I didn't lose money, but I made like 80 cents. I was to say 80 cents an hour or something like that. Like it was ridiculous.
I really enjoyed the little exchange he had with Mrs. Glick, where he's like 50 cents, and she says something along the lines of, "Bart, you forgot to say thank you." And I don't know if you wrote the quote down, but he's like, "I'm not gonna swear. I'm not gonna break things. I'm not gonna do anything bad, but there is no way I'm going to say thank you."
You're welcome. Yeah, that was fucking great, dude. I love that entire scene, and it's both Bart standing his ground and then also just having the rug completely pulled out from out of him. My favorite scene in this entire episode comes up right after this, actually. It's the same scene I was talking about when Homer's talking about when I was your age, that 50 cents would go forever. No, not really. But at the same time, Bart essentially has a man-to-man with Homer, and he declares, "I'm done working. Working is for chumps." Fucking men, brother. I'm totally with you there.
Yeah.
So this is actually the point where we're really going to get to the crux of our episode, I guess you could say. This is where the 3 men come together with the comic book. Because what we basically have is, after a week of back-breaking, skin-cutting labor, Bart has only been able to manage $35. And remember, he started with 30, so he only made $5 the entire week. He goes to the comic book shop to beg, essentially, but before he can, he walks in and Martin is there. Martin managed to have $40 and is asking comic book guy, "Could you do that $100 comic in the window for my measly 40 instead?" Comic book guy's shooting him down, and then I love this moment. He's basically goes to Bart next, like, "Can I help you?" And Bart's like, would you do it for 35? Right after this, we get a moment where Milhouse comes in, and it really kind of, to be fair, this moment kind of solidifies who Comic Book Guy really is for essentially the rest of the series, as far as I know him. Milhouse comes in, and he has a baseball card that he's after, and he asks for it, and basically Comic Book Guy says, show me the $30, or I'm not getting off this stool. Which, again, to me, that if that's like a one-line summary of the character, that might be the perfect line for it.
Yep, and it even comes up with a thank you.
Yeah, immediately when he shows him the money, he's on it. So he gets back with the card. He's been bitching about these stupid kids begging for this comic with not enough money this entire time. He gets the card Milhouse requested, and then immediately Milhouse is like, oh, I don't want it. To which he's like, stupid kids. But what he doesn't know is Bart, again, the underappreciated genius, Bart Simpson, has the idea right there in that moment that if they all pool their money together, they can buy the very first issue of Radioactive Man.
Which, let's be fair here. We all know, like, and this isn't something the Simpsons did, to quote unquote, but $100 for a #1 issue of a comic book, even by the back in those days, in the old Simpson days of the 90s, that's pretty darn cheap.
I think it's just a nice, pretty number more than anything.
Yeah. But still, Bart finds a solution to the issue with his ingenious brain that he doesn't understand that he's always had.
Again, he's always the one that's a perfect example of his street smarts, and that he's always the one that makes these things happen between his friends, which I really like. But immediately we see the problem with this, that Bart's smart, but he's still a 10-year-old hyperactive boy, and he may not have thought this purchase entirely through, because they've parted with their money, they've taken their comic, they're outside the store, they notice that it's about to rain, and when they decide, you know what, we need to get this home so that it doesn't get destroyed, essentially, by getting rained on, you see 3 sets of hands all pulling it in 3 different directions, which, first of all, it's actually really strange that all 3 boys seemingly live in different directions of the comic book store downtown, but that's a whole different thing. The whole point is they're arguing over this comic book at this point. And I love when Comic Book Guy pokes his head out and says, looks like you may have bought more than you bargained for. He's such an asshole. That's who he is. Like, I love that, just jumping ahead a lot here, the Simpsons Treehouse of Horror, where he's the collector, and it's like it's like a parody of comic book movies, but that really kind of like sums up his character perfectly. He's not necessarily like a terrible guy, but he's just kind of an asshole, a lazy asshole. They decided, for now at least, they're gonna take the comic book to Bart's treehouse, and they all 3 are there. And I love the scene where they're actually reading the comic book for the very first time, and it's a very pre-internet problem scene. Actually, I kind of like this idea of like thinking about this in terms of a time when there was no Google or IMDb to just instantly find the answers to what you're looking for. The boys are reading the origin story of one of their favorite characters. They're taking every precaution by they actually take a pair of tweezers and burn it by candle to make sure that there's no moisture or anything on it every single time they turn the page.
Oh, this is just such a great moment, too. It's 3 boys doing what they love kind of thing, like having a slumber party, quote unquote, up in the treehouse with their favorite item.
Yeah, and what I meant by the pre-internet part is they actually, when they discover essentially Radioactive Man was caught on a barbed wire fence, and then a nuclear explosion happened near him, and as the boys talk about, like, wow, you would have thought that would have killed him.
And Bart says, well, now you know better.
But that's certainly what I was talking about, though, is Milhouse actually right there says, oh, that's how it happened. And that kind of, like, struck weird to me, because I was thinking, like, there's a bunch of comic book characters that I've never read a single issue of their comic book, but I know their origin story. But I am fortunate enough to live in an age of Google, where if I find something I'm interested, I mean, shit, dude, like Deadpool. No, I love Deadpool too, don't get me wrong, but he's way popular, so I was trying to go with a different direction. Daredevil. Someone who is arguably a much shittier character just in terms of popularity and whatnot than Deadpool, and also Deadpool's awesome, so fuck Daredevil. But Daredevil, the fucking Netflix show, is amazing. And due to that show, and also I'll admit due to my love of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and the fact that there's actually a large connection with the Mutant Ninja Turtles and Daredevil's origin stories. But I know a lot about Daredevil, and it's all due to Google and IMDb of that show without having ever read a single issue of the comic book.
Well, I mean, obviously, because you're going to talk about it, like, I'm a Spider-Man type guy, for sure, always will be. He is in my radioactive blood, where I will always know where Spider-Man was, even though I'll never own an original comic of it, where I know he got bit by a radioactive spider to do it, so... Yeah, totally get what you're saying. It is kind of funny. Like, you would think the three kids would know how he started without ever having the comic book. But you can understand that moment while they're so excited because they're having this, the number one book in their hands, where maybe it is a little different. I don't know.
So this is where we get to the point where the struggle is real, if you will.
Don't move in with your friends.
The boys started to realize that this comic book couldn't go home with all of them. And they're getting to a way where they're trying to make it fair, and everyone's arguing that it should come to my house. Oh no, I love when Milhouse was like, oh, I should take it home with me. Bart's like, your house? That's crazy talk. Barton comes up with the idea of, like, he splits up. He's like, okay, I'll take it on Sunday, Monday. You can take it Tuesday, Wednesday. Milhouse, you get it Thursday, Friday, or, whatever it was. And basically, Sunday was unaccounted for, and Milhouse and Bart are both just like, what about Sunday? Yeah, what about Sunday? And then Martin, of course, being the smartest kid, is always like, well, we'll have a random number generator, and that'll help us figure out who gets it every Sunday. Of course, they do the same bit with, what about the 0? Yeah, what about the 0?
Freaking math whizzes, all of a sudden.
So they decide that nobody is going to leave the comic book, and the comic book is not going to leave. So they're all just going to stay there in that treehouse until until the last one of them dies, and then they can be buried with it.
It's hellfish. I mean,
it kind of is. You're totally right. It runs in the blood, apparently. So I also love right here at one point in the middle of the night, after they're all sleeping in the treehouse, Martin has to go out and pee, and basically Bart holds him up by slingshot and is like, where do you think you're going? Martin's like, I had to pee, and they actually end up tying Martin up to a chair because they don't trust him to that point, which, for what it's worth, if it's raining, it was raining hard, like, in this episode this entire time. It was one of the reasons they were worried about keeping the comic book dry, right? So it's raining. If I'm a boy, which I at one point was, if I'm a little boy in a treehouse and it's raining, I'm gonna pee off the fucking side of that treehouse. Like, I'm not even gonna let my dick get wet. Like, that's what's gonna happen. So I don't really see why there is an issue here. But I guess Martin's plan was, like, to run all the way inside. Maybe he had to take a shit. Who knows?
Well, we were talking about this with Andy one week or maybe it was Matthew, where Martin hasn't fully embraced his inner wild child yet. He started to in that one episode where Bart and Martin were trading off, helping each other out on their respective...
the opener of Season 2, Bart gets an F.
Yeah,
Great episode.
So it's Matthew. So, we know he is that kind of Miles wild child, so to speak, but he hasn't quite hit it yet.
Hey, what are you trying to say?
That you're a wild child, and we don't know if you're a boy or a girl, apparently. This is another movie moment as well, when they're all looking at each other and it's shifting back and forth between them when they're getting angry eyes. They were actually going after Treasure of the Sierra Madre right there. So, got 2 movie ones in this one.
Weird. I didn't have that at all in my notes. I'm glad you got your guide backing us up.
Yeah.
Man. So, Bart's gone pretty mad about this whole thing, and the other boys actually point this out to him, and Milhouse is like, I'm going to tell your mom. I love this line so much when Bart basically is like, Martin, tell him what we do to squealers. And Martin's like, I have no idea, but is it worse than what you do to people that have to go to the bathroom?
Yeah. That was really funny.
So they actually full out, like, start fighting. Like, there's a full-on tussle happening here. And my thought every time I watch this episode is like, oh my god, one of them is going to fall out of the treehouse every single time. That doesn't happen, but that's always my thought.
Me too.
And there's a great scene where they're fighting, they're at each other's necks, and then it cuts into the Simpsons home where Marge is like, hey, Homer, are the boys doing all right? And Homer kind of glances up from the TV and is like, yeah, they're fine. But I wanted to ask you, I don't know if you noticed, but What room is Homer in this scene?
It looked like Maggie's almost.
Well, here's the things that I observed. So I know for sure there was a beanbag chair, a television, because Homer was sitting in the beanbag chair. He's watching the television. There was a picture of Abe Simpson on the wall above the television. And there was a cell phone. There was not a cell phone. That's not true. But there was a telephone, an old school dial-up telephone sitting on the counter. And then in the corner, there was what appeared to me to be one of those like pop-up punching bags of Krusty the Clown that you might have gotten when you were a kid, where like you punch them and they pop back up.
So you're saying is it like a family room where everyone has like a little bit of something in there?
What I'm saying is this is a room in the Simpsons home that I have never seen in my life. I did not know the Simpsons had a beanbag chair. I didn't know the Simpsons had a second television. I always thought that was kind of the gimmick. Like I don't think this was the living room unless maybe this was some sort of strange side view and the beanbag chair is in front of the couch and the couch is at I honestly have no idea. Like this was a weird moment where this room just kind of threw me for a loop.
Maybe they just had never had to do a scene outside in the treehouse like that before, so they had to come up with some way to have a room where Homer could actually visibly see them, and they were more worried about getting the joke to fire than they were about making the house plan.
Well, you're always the one that notices those types of things. I was hoping you had some insight on that, but it was definitely a strange moment. Back to the scuffle in the treehouse. Like I said, I was worried the entire time one of these fuckers was going to fall out of the treehouse, because that's what it looked like was going to happen to me. And sure enough, it gets to the point where basically simultaneously Milhouse and the comic book are dangling on the edge of falling. Bart's got Milhouse by the sleeve, which is slowly tearing, and the comic book has been picked up by the wind on this stormy evening and was hanging on its spine on the doorway of the treehouse. I almost said the treehouse of horror, but that's only during Halloween episodes.
What do you do? What's more important? I mean, you spent $100 on that.
This is a big decision, right? And I love when Bart's like, Milhouse, it's not that far of a drop, and it's been raining, so the ground is probably a lot softer.
He's right.
I'm not going to lie, dude, and I hope you'll make the same decision, but if we ever have an investment together, and we find ourselves in a situation where I'm dangling off the cliff, and so is the investment, as long as it's reasonable to assume that I am going to live mostly unscathed, drop the shit out of me. I give you advance permission, and just know, permission or not, that's what I'm going to do to you.
Well, seeing as I've watched you jump off a second-story balcony twice in our lives, and I've seen the fear in your eyes, and I know what real fear looks like now, I think I'd be okay.
I wasn't so scared that I didn't do it a second time.
You were scared plenty when you were falling the first time. I will never forget the look in your eyes.
The fall wasn't the scary part. So I jumped off of our apartment balcony onto a bunch of mattresses because our apartment complex.
And nothing but a speedo.
Our apartment complex had changed out all the mattresses, and I gathered them all and made a pad.
A landing pad?
Out of what was it, like 4 mattresses, I think? 5, maybe? I remember it was an odd number because there was one in the middle of the scene. But regardless of all that, I jumped off, and the fall was fine. I wasn't really that worried, but what I did not expect was how high I bounced. This was straight out of a fucking cartoon. I bounced up so high, and I had no control of myself, and I end up coming down at the earth backwards on my head. Totally fucked up. I absolutely admit I was scared shitless, and apparently everybody who saw it saw the fear of whatever in my eye. Because
when you bounced,
I thought I was standing
right. I was standing right next to that mattress right when you bounced, and I looked up at you, and you looked at me, and I just literally saw this oh my god, I'm dead. And we'd only known each other for a few months at the time, I think.
It hadn't been longer than that. We were living together.
No, that was the day we were moving in.
No, we had lived there for a while at this point because we had these old shitty mattresses for the longest time, and they exchanged them all.
And even at that time, it had only been 6 months since we had met?
I don't know. We met in the dorms playing volleyball for a charitable donation tournament, I remember, outside of the Kerr dorm and UNT. If all of you are interested in the history of MrMostDaysOff and the WizKid's bromance.
Yeah.
But you're probably not. So let's get back to The Simpsons.
It was just like Brokeback Mountain. It was a starry night.
It was just like Brokeback Mountain without all the anal sex. I mean, plenty of oral, but none of the anal. It's just not Richie's thing. So anyway, we're back at the treehouse. We got Milhouse dangling, Bart trying to save both. It gets to the point where the sleeve completely rips and Bart does, in fact, save Milhouse. And this is the point where I'm like, you fucking idiots. Because they have this, bromance moment where they're like, oh, you saved me. Yeah, I did. And they just let the comic book waver for a few extra seconds that they could have used to save it, but they don't. And it, of course, as they're trying to grasp for it, it blows out into the rain.
It gets the trifecta.
It lands in the yard, in the mud. And Santa's little helper, who, by the way, should have just been passed through obedience school, so what the fuck is up with that?
And why is he outside in a rainstorm?
Why is he outside in the rainstorm? What is that about? Yeah, but he eats that fucking comic book and shreds the shit out of it.
And then
the lightning strikes the comic book just to put the nail in the coffin. So the boys are obviously distraught. Marge shows up at just this moment and they're fighting with one another, and they actually have Martin tied up, and Marge is like, oh, well, you guys, I've got hot cocoa, and if you want, we can use imitation marshmallows, and you can continue your little tie-up game inside.
That's a classic mom right there. That's something my mom would have done back in the day. She might have said, hey, don't tie him up. But if we've been going at it for a while, she would have been like, yeah, they're just playing like cowboys and Indians or something. I don't know.
Yeah, it's fine. Whatever.
Yeah.
No one's really screaming.
As long as they're not screaming or hitting each other, then that's fine.
Yeah. So we open up to the next day, and Homer's walking outside. He goes to his car where we see the window is left down, and when he opens the door, just like a flood of water comes out. And we see our three boys, Bart, Milhouse, and Martin, trying to piece together the shreds of their destroyed comic book. It's no use. They finally say something along the lines of it's just not going to work. And Bart gives a little speech here talking about how it's a shame that because we couldn't share, we ended up with nothing. So Martin is like, what's your point? And Bart's like, oh, nothing. It just really pissed me off.
It kind of ticked me off. And I loved that.
That's a great ending. I mean, honestly.
I love it when there's episodes that are supposed to have points, but then they point out how there actually is no point, which is the next episode very much happens. Like, I love those moments because they point out all the fallacies and those kind of ideals and whatnot.
Totally. So, Richie, I think that's going to wrap it up for 3 Men in a Comic Book, but is there anything else that you or that companion guide of yours would like to share with us?
Well, I already pointed out that Fall Out Boy was smoking or had a cigarette in his hand after the convention. Something else the guide pointed out, that in the comic book, after the nuclear blast hits Radioactive Man, he actually has 5 fingers.
Oh, shit, that's awesome.
Which is, for those who aren't aware, you should be aware, all the Simpsons characters have 4 fingers. So after a nuclear blast, Radioactive Man...
Don't you mean three fingers and a thumb?
Yes, same difference. Thumb is a finger, technically. Those are the only moments that I really wanted to mention from that. I just thought the Radioactive Man one was pretty funny. He's normal.
I love it when they do little subtle things like that. I didn't catch that at all. That's one of those things that if I'd watched it several more times, I may have caught it. And that's our point about watching The Simpsons,
exactly.
And how it's so deep that you can experience new things every time you watch the show, which I love. I don't have anything else to say about that episode. I thought it was a really great episode. Again, excellent, if you will, since I said that at the top of the show, defending myself from last week. I thought the ending was spectacular.
Yeah.
And overall, real good time. All right, that's going to do it for 3 Men in a Comic Book, but we'll be right back with Blood Feud after this message from our Podern family.
Hey there, everybody, this is Goose.
And I'm Ripkin.
And we are the Wrestle Nerds.
And you better be enjoying this episode of the best darn diddly podcast.
Oh yes, learn a lot about The Simpsons and everything else that involves that universe.
Be sure to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Wrestle Nerds.
And watch us on YouTube as well, folks. We talk all things wrestling and nerdy.
All right, so we got another episode to talk about. Let's talk about Blood Feud, which debuted all the way in August 11th of 1991. And I want to point out here that the last episode we talked about, 3 Men in a Comic Book, aired all the way back on May 9th of 1991. So I thought it was strange that there was such a huge gap in the release dates. I actually Googled to make sure that IMDb wasn't incorrect. That this was, in fact, the last episode of the season. But it just had a 3-month gap in between. I thought that was quite strange. Regardless, we got a chalkboard gag of, I will not sleep through my education. Meh. I did. It seemed to work out all right. And we get a repeat couch gag of the couch just falling through the floor into what we presume is the Simpsons basement, which we still have not seen, so I'm still waiting on that one. This episode opens up with another appearance of Mayor Quimby talking about how excited they are for this new emergency plan system to warn people in the event of a nuclear disaster. It comes with a range of advice from relax, everything is fine, all the way down to repent sins.
I love the moment where Homer has where he's like, the joke's on them. If that actually happens, there's no power for the sign to work.
Yeah, if the core explodes, this sign won't have any power. So this episode starts out actually really quickly in that Monty Burns was supposed to be at this opening of this system to dedicate the new sign, and he was a no-show. Smithers is very concerned because Monty Burns is not known for being late. And sure enough, they find him collapsing in his bedroom, I think it was.
Yeah.
Turns out right away that he is in fact, or actually at first there's a great scene where Smithers is like trying to get Monty Burns to go to the doctor. And Monty's like, I'm not going to have any quacks applying leeches to me. And he basically passes out while doing this. So it turns out Mr. Burns is actually hypohemic. Or, in layman's terms, as the doctor puts it, he has a lack of blood, and the only answer is he's going to need a transfusion. I love this scene right here. Smithers is immediately like, take mine. Just leave me enough to get home. He rips the shirt off to his vein. He's like, just leave me enough to get home.
And then we learned an important issue with Mr. Burns. Apparently he only has type 00 negative blood.
Which is very, very rare, and Smithers is disgusted with himself for having B+, which is just common gutter blood. Mr. Burns does remind Smithers, though, hey, that kidney you donated really hit the spot. So we then cut to Burns frantically looking for a 00 negative blood type donor, and the boys in the nuclear plant are talking about how it would be to help out Mr. Burns. And Carl says something along the lines of like, yeah, I'd donate my blood, but I don't want to. And Homer's like, are you kidding me? Like, you don't want to cash in on this cash cow? You'd rather just rot away in this dead-end job? And Carl reminds him, like, you do know I'm your boss, right? Oh, sorry, sir.
I'm your supervisor.
So we flash back to the Simpsons' home. And I also love the scene with Lisa and Maggie. Lisa is teaching Maggie trying to like use flashcards to educate this baby, which I guess she is magical, so she'll probably pick up on it. But I love the line when Lisa is basically explaining to Marge what she's doing, and she's trying to give Maggie all of the opportunities that she didn't have, which Marge is, of course, like, well, we tried our best, honey.
You know what's funny about those cards? And she's showing Maggie the cards where it has like the name of the animal on it. My dad was telling me a story yesterday about how he used to do this with me when I was little, and I would get all the cards right, and he said I was just a couple years old, and there's one card of a monkey on there, but it wasn't monkey. It was some monkey I've never even heard of, and I think it started with like a Z or something like that. And my dad said he couldn't even pronounce it, and he kept yelling at the box because he didn't know why this card came in there with all the other ones.
I can see your dad getting pissed off at a boxy card.
But it's just like, it made me laugh because I was like, yeah, why would they try to teach like a little 2-year-old or 3-year-old how to say this highly intelligent word? But
like dodecahedron.
Like, yeah, exactly. But just when I saw that, when I was watching the episode, it made me immediately think of that. And it's funny because my dad just told me that story like a day or two ago.
That's awesome. So Homer runs in and he's immediately, like, Marge, what type of blood do I have? And when he doesn't have 00 negative, he's really mad. He's like, oh, you mean I don't have this extremely rare blood type? That sucks. Like, he's super disappointed. He might as well have come in being disappointed that he didn't win the lottery. Homer is basically convinced that donating blood to Mr. Burns would be like a cash cow coming in. Like, the donations would just come running. The gifts would come running. And he's very, very excited when he finds out, because Marge knows everything about the family. Everything. It's almost creepy. And she knows that Bart happens to have 00 negative. So Homer's really ecstatic. He's excited. He believes that they are about to get rich quick just by giving a little bit of his son's blood away. Bart's a little bit concerned. He doesn't know about this whole needle thing and taking his blood, but Homer tries to calm him down with the story of Hercules and the lion.
Is it a biblical story?
I love that. Bart asks if it's a story from the Bible.
Yeah, probably.
He goes on to talk about how Hercules helped out the lion with the thorn in his paw, and the
only somebody strong could take the thorn out of his paw.
Yeah.
It made sense to me.
And then the lion showered Hercules in riches. I love when Bart is like, "Wait, how can a lion have any riches?" Shut up, boy. It was olden times.
One of Homer's classic tales.
So Bart is agreed, or more or less volunteered by Homer to donate his blood. They go to the donation van outside the power plant that Smithers arranged, and they find out that Otto is the phlebotomist, or as he put it, he's the needle tech dude.
That's appropriate as well. I mean, come on. I understand what
I
he
don't
means
know, man.
when he says that.
I know we talked about it before. I donate plasma every week, and if a dude like Otto came up to me, I would be a little bit concerned. And that's not to say, like, I'm not against stoners. Like, I totally am of the opinion that people can be very successful and do their job well while smoking. That's fine. If you're used to weed, you can handle your shit. That's cool. That's not the issue. But Otto in particular, I would be a little bit concerned with.
Well, then don't go to Springfield to donate blood.
That's what this basically says, yeah.
See, we teach life lessons on this program each and every week.
The show gets a lot heavier than you would think for just a silly little cartoon show.
No, I like when after the blood's donating, where it cuts to Burns being inside on his bed and he's making Smithers write down all his thoughts, his epitaph or whatever, and he's talking about I'm patriots and American, and he says patriot again, and I'm like, no, you're not. Every time we see flashbacks of you, you're like German or you're doing something against the Americans. Like, that makes no sense.
Yeah, he was definitely rewriting his own history here. But yeah, as he's giving his final words, where you think he's dying at first, like the longer his speech goes, the more and more strength he acquires, and Bart's blood is really taking effect. And by the end of it, he is at full blown, like, passionate speech, and he's back.
It's Monty Burns.
Exactly. So he shows up back at work. I love when he's going through and, like, he doesn't actually remember anybody's name. He's like, "Oh, good old you," and "Hey, look at you, brown shoes," and things of that. He has a riveting game of Jai-Alai, which is a game most people don't know of, but looks like a lot of fun. It's one I've never actually played, but I'd like to. It's a great word for hangman, for what it's worth. That's why I knew what it was. So this plan by Homer to save Burns' life in hopes of getting rich quick looks like it's about to pay off.
Cha-ching.
Exactly, because Burns is ready.
And he's happy.
To send the Simpsons he's happy, and he is ready to send the Simpsons a surprise. A very nice surprise indeed. And it arrives. Homer's checking the mail diligently every day, and he finally gets that envelope addressed from C.M. Burns. And he's so excited, he wants to go out in the yard and read it there so the neighbors can see. He wants Lisa to do something with the lights. He's not sure which. Turn them on, turn them off, brighten them, turn on the water faucet, whatever. She's trying to make Dad happy. He pulls out this card, and it's just a card. There's no check. There's no cash. It just says, "Thank you. We appreciate the blood." And that's all he received.
And that's the dilemma of this episode here, and Marge will bring it up a few times. Does he really owe the Simpsons anything? Because I don't think he does.
He does not technically owe anything. You are totally right. This was all. And even a quote by Homer here that kind of like ties this all together, where at some point Homer's mad about only receiving the card, and he actually says the words, "That man broke my word."
Yeah, I love that part. It's Homer lied, but he's blaming it on Burns lied to my son, basically.
Yeah, Homer had it in his mind the entire time that just because Mr. Burns was rich, he was going to shower them with wealth for saving his life. And to be fair, I mean, maybe a small bonus or gift would have been appropriate, but it definitely wasn't required.
Rich people don't get rich by sharing their money.
That's a true fucking point right there. True fucking point.
I mean, we're both billionaires, so we know this personally.
Yeah. I love that, actually, at that same scene I was talking about when Homer's going through the mail. It's Bill, 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 Bill. Woohoo!
Oh, man. But I really like Homer's retaliation attempt that him and Bart come up with here in the next scene, too.
Yeah, the letter.
Yes. Yes.
The letter was essentially them writing a scathing message. It started out with like, oh, we appreciate the card so much, and we're so glad you enjoyed Bart's blood. And then it went on to say, and just in case you didn't know, I was being sarcastic. And then he basically put on a slew of insults.
He's dictating to Bart, and he says, you stink. And then he goes, can you read that last part back to me? And Bart goes, you stink. He goes, good. You are a senile, buck-toothed old mummy with bony girl arms, and you smell like... And then Bart goes, an elephant's butt? And Homer starts laughing and goes, an elephant's butt.
That's great.
And I like this part because it was like a fucked up way of Bart and Homer actually like kind of bonding for a quick little moment.
I mean, to be fair, Homer and Bart almost always kind of bond through not necessarily the greatest of ways. Like, I think it's great in that their relationship grows, but Homer and Bart do some scheming through their years,
Yep,
for sure.
Absolutely.
For sure.
It's both of their strengths, even though Homer's is terribly weak.
Yeah, but he's willing to try.
Yep.
I also really dig the scene when Marge is kind of correcting Homer and that, like, you know, you're supposed to do nice things to, like, be kind out of your heart, not because you expect things.
Yeah, kindness is its own reward or something like that.
Yeah, and then Homer's like, Marge, I love you, but you live in a world of make-believe with little... I didn't write it down, but he goes on, he complete asshole. He's like, with little elves and unicorns and rainbow sunshiny days.
And over the next few years, he's going to do this quite a few more times, and they get better. Over the years, these get better and better when he does these little things to Marge like that.
Kind of like the same way as last week when we talked about him having conversations with his own brain.
Yes.
This is very much in the same tune where, yeah, this is a running theme of the show, and it's fucking great. I love it. I love it so much. I also really love, however, when Homer's angry and he is going to mail this letter, but Marge stops him. And she, I really like seeing at the mailbox, she puts his hand on his chest and calms him down, and Homer's like, you always do that hand thing, and it usually works.
Homer's a softie. We talked about that last week, too. He's a romantic.
He totally is, and that's great. I like it. So Homer decides to sleep on it at Marge's request, and all night he's dreaming of strangling Mr. Burns, who has wronged him so. But eventually that strangling motion turns into the squeezing of syrup onto his pancakes and his breakfast. And turns out he wakes up and Marge has actually made him breakfast. And he's so glad that Marge talked him out of mailing that letter. It would have been the biggest mistake of his life if he had actually sent that to his boss.
So that's it. End of story. Morals learned.
And that's where the episode ends, yeah. Except for the fact that turns out Bart went ahead and mailed the letter because he knew that Homer's an emotional creature. There were some things in that letter that needed to be said, Richie. And Bart knew that there was a chance that even though Homer went to bed mad, he might not wake up mad.
Well, Mr. Burns does need to know that he is an elephant's butt. It's very important.
True. I love when Homer's searching frantically for the letter, and he finally asks Bart, hey, Bart, have you seen the letter? And Bart's like, yeah, of course. And Homer's like, okay, this is very important. Where is the last place you saw it? Bart's like, well, the last place I saw it was in my hand as I was shoving it into the mailbox.
I love the way that it's comedically dramatic where like actually first he pauses, he goes, it was in my hand, and Homer's like, uh-huh. Like at that point you already know, Homer, like it's not gonna get any better.
Homer starts strangling Bart, and Marge essentially corrects him. Is like, Homer, you should be strangling yourself.
Shut up, Marge.
Homer is trying everything he possibly can to get this letter out of his mailbox. He's got Bart by the ankles, sticking him down into the mailbox as far as he can. He's reaching in with all of his might. He comes up with the plan that he's going to flood the thing. He's going to get a hose. He's going to fill it with water so that all the mail will get ruined, but most importantly, the ink that he wrote in will run and not be legible anymore. Bart points out, like, isn't that going to ruin everyone's mail? And Homer's like, well, think about the letters we usually write. Like, dear so-and-so, I've been doing this that you don't care about. Signed, Joe Schmo, or something of that nature. Essentially, he makes fun of the fact that a lot of our communications with one another is very, very shallow. And, I mean, he's not wrong.
No, he's not. Now we just do it in text message.
Yeah, or Facebook or Twitter or whatever, totally. He basically tells Bart when he's getting this hose that, hey, let's have some sort of signal that, when the mailman comes, you need to let me know. Like, and Bart's like, hey, Dad, the mailman's here. Yeah, that's great. Let's use that.
When the mail lady's standing right behind him. Oh, I love that exchange where he's like, well, I'm not going to run because you know who I am and you know where I live and you know my address.
Yep.
And she's like, yep. And he goes, well, I'm still going to run. And he takes off running. Which that leads to one of my favorite little scenes in all of Simpsons lore. I don't know what it exactly is about this scene, but I absolutely have loved this from the very first time I saw it. It made me cry from laughing so hard when Homer and Bart go to the post office and they walk up to the clerk and Homer is changing his voice a little bit and he goes, hello, my name is Mr. Burns. I believe you have a letter for me.
Okay, what's your first name, Mr. Burns?
I don't know. And then he blames Bart. He goes, good plan, Bart. But I don't know what it is about that moment. It's so quick, but it's so damn funny. Just, I don't know. Like, it gets me every freaking time. I love that moment.
It's a fantastic Homer moment. It's just such a great portrait of who Homer is.
When people catch me in like a situation where I don't actually know something, I always say I don't know just like that.
Yeah.
Like I always do.
So yeah, that plan fails miserably. So Homer decides that instead he's going to try to sneak into Mr. Burns' office and actually steal the letter before he can read it, before he gets to work. Which, that plan also fails miserably. He gets caught halfway through, basically, and Mr. Burns ends up reading the letter right there in front of Homer. I love when Mr. Burns reads it at first, and he stops at he just reads the first part we talked about earlier, where he, thank you so much for the card, and we really, we hope you enjoy the blood, before you get the part where he says I was being sarcastic. And Mr. Burns is, like, touched. Like, oh, I'm so glad that there's still people like you in this world, Homer. Like, so many people are greedy, blah, blah, blah. But, oh, hey, wait, there's more.
In case you didn't know, this is sarcasm. What? An elephant's butt?
So Burns is fucking pissed. First thing he does is he has him escorted from the building by a bigger dude, and you get the impression that Homer and this guy know each other, because he's like, come on, don't twist my arm so much. And he's like, Homer, I don't tell you how to do your job.
What I liked is the brief little moment where Burns is watching him getting walked out from his office, and he literally does a speech about how he could crush Homer like an ant, and he holds up his hand, which Homer's out in the distance, literally walking like in between his fingers in the distance, so it looks like he's actually crushing Homer like an ant.
Which he's actually strong enough to do with Bart's blood, whereas later in the show, we know we'll get to a point where he'll try to crush an actual ant.
And gets toppled. The ant pushes him off.
But yeah, Burns is fucking pissed. He wants revenge, dude. Like, he wants revenge bad. He wants to have Homer beaten up, actually, by the guy that we saw him escorted out of the building from. And there's a scene with Smithers talking to him, basically like, hey, do you know Homer? And he's like, oh, yeah, he's a nice guy. I've played poker over at his house a few times. Well, we're going to need you to beat him up. Yeah, no problem.
What'd he do?
It's fucked up. Smithers is kind of feeling bad about this, though. You can see that he's very, very hesitant to have Homer beaten up, and he actually says, can you hold the kicks when you do it? Like, yeah, no kicks, no problem. But it turns out Smithers actually calls off the entire thing, because Smithers is just so grateful that Bart saved Mr. Burns' life that he can't imagine beating Homer Simpson.
Yep, and it's not anything with Homer or Bart. It's all about Mr. Burns. That's all it is. Like, he doesn't care about the Simpsons at all. He's just so happy that Burns is alive that he doesn't want anything to happen to this family, because who knows what's going to happen down the road. Might need Bart again.
True. And I mean, we've seen many times in the past already, and we know there's many times to come in the future where Smithers is actually diabolical a lot of times towards the Simpsons.
Yeah.
Like, he does not have their best interest at heart in any way, shape, or form.
I think he loosens up as the seasons go on and on. There's that one episode where him and Lisa make a new Malibu Stacy doll and whatnot, like, and he opens up towards them a little bit more, but definitely for the first few seasons, he's an ass to the Simpsons.
Just off the top of my head, there's the episode where Homer is frauding the company for hair and kind of taking his spot, and he gets very, very jelly.
Well,
very, very
There's
quick.
one episode where he actually takes Smithers' spot, where Mr. Burns tells Smithers to take a vacation, and Homer takes over for him, and then he doesn't want Smithers to come back because Homer does such a good job.
So Homer is now just kind of... He's lost his job. This letter he didn't really want to send got sent in. He's in a low spot. He goes to the bar for support, of course, because that's what Homer does. And we get another classic Bart and Lisa prank call. Is Mike Roch available? And of course, when Mo yells it out, it's Mike Crotch. Is Mike Crotch? Anyone seen Mike Crotch?
And then I love the exchange that Mo and Barney have right after that with Homer. Because Homer's drinking because he's got troubles, and Mo says you shouldn't drink to forget your problems. And Barney says, yeah, you should drink only to enhance your social skills.
Belch.
Yeah, I love that little moment. It's just always so spot on.
You know, that we go to this a lot, but just watching as an adult versus as a kid, I get a lot more. I've always liked Mo as a character, but I'm getting a lot more out of Mo as a character now as I'm watching through at this age, for whatever reason that may be. I'm really that kind of across the bar therapy that we've talked about in the past, where, you know, the old time adage of you go to the bar to drink and share your problems with the bartender. And I never really picked up on that as much as a kid, but I always liked Mo's like quick lines and whatnot, but there's the subtleties of his characters that I'm really enjoying a lot more this time.
See, with me, the older I get, the more I love Mr. Burns and Ned Flanders. Like, I feel like I was always irritated by Ned in my younger years, but the older I get, the more I just, like, his character is so complex, and, just love how Homer gives Ned so much shit over the years, and Ned always responds with the good-hearted Christian way you're supposed to respond, whereas Burns is the exact opposite. He's always the devil in everything he's doing, basically, as a metaphor. And it's just great because they're both voiced by the same actor. That's Harry Shearer. He does both their voices, and it's so cool that he can have two completely different characters with completely different voices that are complete opposites. I love that, and the older I get, the more I love both those characters.
Yeah, the talent on the Simpsons voice acting cast is
they go full out.
Astounding. I mean, just I think I'd have to give props most to Hank Azaria. I think he does the most for what it's worth. But I mean, a lot of the character, and you know what? For what it's worth, even the people that only do one or two voices, like, they do them so well. Even if they're not doing the multiple voices, like, still props to them. But in particularly, the people like that do like multiple characters, it's always very impressive to me.
Absolutely, I agree with you. And I'm glad everyone's back this season. Especially there's only a couple more to go.
Yeah, if they're going to end it at 30, I'm glad. I want them to finish strong with everyone who's still living, obviously. But so Smithers has kind of turned Burns around a bit. Burns was out for revenge, but other than that, he's actually been kind of a all new person. Like, he's been a happy-go-lucky, taking advantage of life again because he's, you know, had a second shot at it. And Smithers essentially convinces him that, like, you know, without the Simpsons, you wouldn't be here. And Burns decides, you know, instead of revenge, I need to thank them. And he decides that he's going to go and get the Simpsons an elaborate gift. Something that they would never be able to afford otherwise, and something that'll show his appreciation for what they've done for him. And he goes to the mall, and they're looking at all sorts of stuff. I feel like it's a really great joke, but at the same time, it just makes you feel so shitty, because at one point, Mr. Burns actually looks at a pool table, and he scoffs at it, saying, like, and turn their home into a local pub? I would never do that to the man. And, like, I think at the bottom of everyone's heart, they know that Homer would fucking love a pool table. Like, that would be the greatest gift you could ever give him. Or, even if not at his home, you could literally install it at Moe's, and same concept. He would be equally happy with it. But instead, Monty Burns finds a gift that's $32,000. Smithers is cautious, telling him, "Are you sure you want to spend that much? And don't ruin the moment with your price taggery." I want to get them something that they'll love. And also keep in mind that this entire time, too, since his revival, since his new life, Burns has actually been writing his own book. He turned away the ghostwriter whose first question was, "Have you slept with anyone famous?" Because he's not some bimbo. He can write his own book. And he did. He wrote the book, Will There Ever Be a Rainbow?
Isn't that a book you want to read, though?
I would absolutely read Will There Ever Be a Rainbow by Montgomery Burns.
That'd be an
no
interesting
doubt.
read.
Monty Burns shows up at the Simpsons' home, and Homer is initially scared. He dives behind the couch, but Lisa points out that he's smiling, and he actually comes bearing gifts. And he didn't want to put this eyesore of a pool table in their home, but he was fine with this $32,000 head. Not an Aztec head, mind you, like Maggie suggested, but an Olmec head. And I actually really appreciate the part before that when at first, Monty Burns basically is like, "Bart, here you go." And he hands him a crowbar. And Bart's like, "Hell yeah, cool." And Lisa once again is like, "The crowbar is to open the gift. That's not the gift itself."
Which that made Bart's day, just having the crowbar. And Bart seems to be the only one that likes the gift to begin with. I want to ask you this. How did they get that crate inside the Simpsons' home?
That does not make any sense, does it?
There's this huge-ass crate in the middle
Maybe
of the
that
living
bay
room.
window opens up. Who knows?
Maybe Maggie used the force. Who knows?
Maybe. She's magical Maggie, after all.
But yeah, it makes no sense that crate was inside their home.
But after this gift is given, Marge is trying to come up with the moral of the story. She suggests that the moral of the story is that good deeds are their own reward. But Bart points out, "But we got a reward. Check out this awesome head."
And I love that Homer points out that also they wouldn't have gotten the reward if he hadn't have written that letter. And if Bart hadn't accidentally given it, or if Bart hadn't have mailed the letter, they still wouldn't have gotten it.
So that was the no good deed goes unrewarded. And then that's when Homer points out, like he said, that like, well, we wouldn't have got anything if I had not written that letter. So Marge changes to, maybe the moral is the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Then Lisa points out, maybe there's just no moral.
And I love what Homer says at the end here, because it's just a bunch of stuff that happened.
And that pretty much sums it up, doesn't it?
And that's what we were talking about at the end of the previous episode that we were reviewing. Is that a lot of times the Simpsons point out that there doesn't always have to be a moral, even though most of the time in their episodes there are. But sometimes it's just something that happened. Like there's no reason to try to figure out why or why not things happen. It's just reactions to other things that happened. That's all it is.
Well, it's kind of a boring look on life, but it's kind of just I believe personally that people invent religion and things because it's just too hard to admit like life is just what it is, and we all live and then we die and it's done. That's how I believe things go. But regardless of that, I think this kind of plays into that idea in the sense that life is just a bunch of stuff that happens and then it's done. There's not necessarily like people are always searching for the meaning of life, and maybe the ultimate meaning of life is that there is no meaning of life. We're just here and we just get this short window for whatever reason, and we got to do what we can with it.
Well, there's something almost freeing in that train of thought, though. Like it can kind of release you from a lot of worry and trouble in the same regards that religion offers that as well.
It means no worries for the rest of our days.
Hakuna Matata, bitches.
It's our worry-free.
Philosophy.
Hakuna Matata.
Hasadiga Iboai.
Hasadiga Iboai. Hasadiga Iboai.
Anyways.
Yeah. Thanks for cutting me off. I should not be the one that sings on the show. That's your gig.
I don't want to go down that road of that term either.
So let's go ahead and call it here. I think we've talked enough about The Simpsons today. I'll go ahead and give you one more chance. Is there anything that you or that companion guide of yours want to talk about with the episode of Blood Feud?
No, there's not anything worthy in this episode. I was worried when the episode started we wouldn't have enough to talk about, but we clearly did today. So.
Yeah, this is fucking long. It is what it is. It's the season finale. Listen to it in halves if you need to. It's fine, whatever. But
are we going to release our top 5 episodes list for this season?
I think it's time. I don't have anything else to add on this episode either. I said everything I wanted to say, but it is time. Now, there's a lot of episodes in this season, so we're not going to rank them all the way through like we did with season 1, but we are going to name our top 5 episodes of the season. Now, Richie and I have not discussed this at all. We have purposely kept this from one another. We have done our own work. We've done our own rating. We both labored. I slaved and sweat, and I think Richie took like 30 seconds and was like, yeah, these 5. But whatever. We fucking made our lists, and we're about to reveal our top 5 episodes for season 2. And at number 5, Richie, what do you have?
Now, I want to preface this with saying that I knew which 5 episodes were going to be in my top 5. However, arranging them in the top 5 was definitely difficult. I scratched out the numbers multiple times except for the number 1 episode.
Dude, I had 10, and I fucking flipped them all around. I had 10 that I had to knock into 5, and I'm still not convinced I'm not going to change it by the time you get done sharing your list. But let's go ahead and start with our number 5s. What did you have?
Bart the Daredevil.
Ooh, okay, and that one just did not quite make my cut.
I had it at number 6 for a little while, then I put it in the top 5.
It was my number 6 as well. So mine was Itchy and Scratchy and Marge.
My issue with picking Bart the Daredevil was just the jump. That's such an iconic scene.
I love that episode. I love that episode so much I'm upset I didn't pick it for my top 5, but I have to say that part of it might be that, for me, I always loved Bart the Daredevil, and I always liked Itchy and Scratchy and Marge, but I think that watching this one through as an adult, it meant a lot more to me this time, and I think the overall message of the story, I think one of my favorite moments in the entire season is when Marge talks about the idea that, yeah, maybe one person can make a difference, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they should.
All right, well, that leads into number 4. What'd you have at number 4?
I had one of my favorite guest appearances with Danny DeVito in the episode, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?
My number 4 is actually from today. It's 3 Men in a Comic Book.
Another one of mine that just did not quite make the cut, but was on my top 10 list. Number 3, Richie, what did you have as your 3rd favorite episode of the season?
The Way We Was. It's too, like Bart the Daredevil, it's a very iconic episode, but I talked about this when we reviewed the episode. This sets up so much of Marge and Homer's history that I put it in the top 5, both because I always enjoy the episode, and I think it just has too many moments that stay with you afterwards.
Another solid choice that did not make my top 5. My number 3 episode, I chose Homer versus Lisa in the 8th Commandment, where Homer takes an opportunity to have a legal cable and has a battle of morals with Lisa over it.
That one is the one that I almost put as the number 5 episode, and I went back and forth between that and Bart the Daredevil for, like you said, about 30 seconds, and then I just went with my gut.
Right on, man. That's cool.
What about your number 2?
So here's the thing with my number 2, is my number 2 episode was my number 1 episode up until the last minute before we went on the air, and I changed it because this last watch through had such a meaningful impact to me. But my current number 2, what I'm going with for my final list, my number 2 episode is the first episode of the season that we discussed with Matthew Klickstein, and that is the classic Bart Gets an F.
I think I've just seen that episode too many times, and that played into a lot of this ranking. There's certain episodes where I've seen so much that I feel like it's almost blanded it into my brain a little bit, like it almost whitewashes it, and Bart the Daredevil almost had that impact in my ranking.
I think that's what happened to me with Bart the Daredevil.
Yeah, like I almost didn't put it in my top 5 because I feel like I've seen it too much. My number 2 episode, and one that I feel like was impactful to me in a lot of ways, was Lisa's Substitute. And you'll never see me put a Lisa episode except for one. There's one Lisa episode that I absolutely love, and I think it's in season 6, and it's the beach episode where they go away to the beach.
Oh, the Summer of 4'2". I love that fucking episode. Yeah, that's one of my all-time favorites as well. I'm honestly shocked to hear you put Lisa Substitute on this list. Not that that's not a fantastic episode. I just did not expect that coming from WizKid today.
It just impacted me more this watch through than it typically has in the past, especially with the way the cast talked about with both of their big guest stars this season. That means something to me.
Well, that's something, the way that I feel about it watching it through on this one, not necessarily with the guest stars, but that's what happened to me on the number 1 pick, is I was so much more impacted this time than I had been in the past. I never realized how great of an episode, but I would like to hear yours first. Richie, the WizKid, number 1 best episode of season 2.
This is not going to be a shock to you, just like my favorite episode of season 1. I've said it a lot. Unky Herb is one of my favorite all-time Simpson characters. Oh Brother, Where Art Thou is my favorite episode. Just everything about it I just love. Great guest star. Homer being an idiot at times. And I have fun every single time I watch this episode.
That was one that rotated into my number 1 several times. As I said already, it ended up at number 4. This episode for me is one that I always appreciated, never realized how much I truly loved it. and that is One Fish, Two Fish, Blowfish, Bluefish, the story of Homer's last day alive. A dark, dark, dark subject matter that I find so fascinating. I'm still not over the fact that I just cannot understand how brilliant the Simpsons writers are to take this dark subject matter and make it so funny and have such a Simpsons sense of humor to it. I feel like that is the writing staff at the peak of their A game, and that is why it's my number one pick this season.
I like that. I thought about maybe doing it for a few seconds. I feel like a lot of the montage stuff they do with Grandpa, where I understand how it sets their relationship up, I feel like it's a little out of character for Abe, and it kind of brought it back a little bit for me. And again, it's one of those episodes that when I was younger, I saw that episode all the time on TV, and like we talked about a few minutes ago, it might have just like I'm so familiar with the episode that it made me not like it as much.
I understand. I think that we have talked about The Simpsons enough for one day, WizKid. So, is there anything that you would like to plug before we wrap on season 2?
Please, guys, we're always more than happy to talk to you on Twitter. You can follow me at thewiz_kid23. Also, go over to our shows page, which is at Best Darn Diddly. That's Diddly with 3 Ds, D-I-D-D-L-Y. And make sure you follow us on there as well.
We love interacting with you guys on Twitter and everywhere. I'm at MrMostDaysOff on Twitter. What we'd really love, this would be doing us such a big favor if you'll do this for us. Go to iTunes. Go to the Fans Podcast on iTunes and write us a 5-star. I can't tell you to say it's a 5-star, but write us a fucking 5-star review. It's super helpful. Mention at Best Darn Diddly, or mention the Best Darn Diddly review show by name. That part's important. Do that and we'll read your review right here on the podcast, give you a shout out. Also, come and join me on voicesofwrestling.com, where I do a weekly review with Chris Novembrino of Lucha Underground for all of you wrestling fans. And finally, guys, I just want to say thank you so much for listening. We have a blast making this show. We're through 2 seasons now. We envision going all the way through 30. Hopefully some of you are going to stick with us through part of that at least. We're grateful for all of you that are still listening, and share this with everyone. We want this to go as big as possible. So if you like this show, share it with your friends, share it with your family, share it with anyone that you know that loves The Simpsons.
Your dog and cat.
If they've got a smartphone and can listen to a podcast, share it with them. We don't care who it is. We look forward so much to coming back with you for Season 3, where we've got a couple of great guests already lined up. We're going to have Matthew Klickstein back again. We're going to have the Wrestle Nerds. We're going to have Toby from the Secret Transmission podcast. We may have a few other people lined up in there. We're going to talk to some folks. We're going to watch some Simpsons. We're going to have a great time. We will see you next week with the start of Season 3, when we have the episode Stark Raving Dad with the guest star of the late, great Michael Jackson, and Mr. Lisa Goes to Washington.
And keep watching the skis.
We'll see you next week.